Part 3 features photos taken after 1940, refinery operation details, and 2012 status. It must have been a go-to-work with parent day. Helen is Harry's daughter. This would have been the first steel derrick purchased. Harry Hawks and Watt Steves purchased this steel derrick in Quebec, the first of 3 owned by the company. What is unique about this photo is we can look up inside the derrick and see the baler suspended from its cable. Arnold replaced Harold Toole as oil pumper when Harold took over the refinery. He got a sleeve caught when oiling a pump. His clothing eventually jammed the gears, stalling the engine, but not before he suffered serious injury requiring months in the hospital. The Army took him but rejected Harold. A lung infection led to an early discharge and complications from which he never recovered. He returned to work at the oil fields, but debilitating lung problems took him at age 44. Charles had worked at the oil fields for 5 years when he became the first of 2 men to die from an accident. On November the 12th, 1942, Charles was bailing well 83. While attempting to slow the descent of the baler into the well, a wheel broke, a piece of which struck him in the abdomen. He died upon arrival at the Moncton Hospital. The other man was Bill Jonah, who was killed November the 10th, 1949. Well 106 on Route 114 in Stony Creek has a storied past. It was a big producer up to 100 barrels a day at its peak. This well was likely the most photographed well in the system because of its prominent location. Donald Olofsson, on leave in sailor uniform, standing beside his father's 1936 DeSoto with well 106 in the background. This picture may have been taken by his fiancée Helen. This photo, one of many taken by Harold Toole, could be the last taken of this prominent well along Route 114. Well 106 was located on land purchased by Spencer in 1976. Until it was abandoned in 2006, he had to work around it, so he was glad to see it go. Being a good producer, he was offered an incentive to restart the well, but he declined. A note on the back of this picture said that it was a Victoria Day parade in Hillsborough. Harry Hawks decorated this truck a 1942 Maple Leaf. Orland Jonah, known as Ted, started to work as a tool dresser on the oil fields, eventually becoming a driller. This well was located on the north side of the road in Dawson Settlement. From left to right, Ted Jonah, driller, his brother Odber, Odber's son Herman, and Don Prosser. Odber and Herman and son-in-law Frank Day walked down the road to visit Ted. Frank took the photo. Herman saved the photo for 64 years to reveal it in this video. Don Prosser worked at the oil fields after returning from Army service in 1946 until the mid-1950s. He was employed as a mechanic. Like his father before him, David worked at the oil fields from 1948 to 1950, pumping oil, dismantling and erecting steel derricks. He retired in 1986 from the NBCC as an instructor in mechanical technology. Inset is David's father Talmage, who retired from the oil field in 1959 at age 72. Like many oilfield employees, he had a stationary engineer's ticket, allowing him to fire boilers. He was a jack of all trades who repaired engines and assorted machinery. Ulrich Milton, World War II veteran, worked at CN on the Albert Line before being employed as a driller on the oil fields in 1954. The company stopped drilling at well 167 in the late 1960s. When company drilling slowed, Ulrich worked for Mobile, Western DeKalb, and Irving. Mobile offered him a job with a company in Texas. Doug Steeves supplied this memorial in memory of his friend Ulrich. It will be mounted on Pump Jack 73, shown in the next frame. This 1930s pump jack, salvaged from the oil fields, sits on Doug Steeves' Preservation Park in Weldon. It changed the rotary motion of a motor to a vertical motion required to lift oil from the well. This one is devoid of motor and the sucker rod which extends into the well. Well 73 is still supplying oil today. The newer pump uses a slave cylinder driven by hydraulic pressure to lift the oil. The tank is insulated to keep oil flowing in cold weather. A tanker truck transfers oil from the storage tank as required. A motor powered by electricity, steam, or natural gas is speed reduced by a gear set which turns a crank with a counterweight which is attached via a pitman arm to the I-beam. The horse head end of the I-beam drives a cable attached to a polish rod which in turn is connected to the downhole pump with a sucker rod inside the oil carrying tubing, typically 2+ inches in diameter. A seal called a stuffing box directs oil coming up the tubing through a pipe to oil storage. The pump typically operates at a speed of 1 stroke per minute. The barrel of the pump acts as a plunger inside the tubing. On the downstroke, the ball and seat in the bottom allows oil to enter the pump barrel. On the upstroke, the ball falls into the seat, forcing oil up the pump barrel to the surface. Sucker rods, typically 24 feet or longer, threaded end to end, extend into the well to the downhole pump assembly. Stony Creek wells were typically over 3,000 feet deep. Ball and seat used in Stony Creek. The O'Bannon Company manufactured oil well components. Seating cups act as a seal between the pump barrel and the oil carrying tubing. 12 are used on each pump. Darkova seating cups come in a box of 12, a full complement. These oil pump components are complements of Doug Steeves. 1 1/2 horsepower Fairbanks Morse Model Z horizontal piston engine used to drive a pump jack. The engine typically used natural gas for fuel. It features 2 flywheels and a flat belt pulley. The nameplate says Made in Canada. Operating speed 500 RPM, patented in 1917 and 1918. These small stationary engines, sometimes known as one-lungers, served a multitude of jobs from fishing boats to farms. 4 and possibly more of the next 9 photos were taken by a member of the Olofsson family. The elevated refinery pictures were taken from atop the large crude oil tank. The refinery first came into production in 1931. Steam was generated in the boiler in Building 6. Crude oil was heated in Building number 2. Heated oil fed to the fractioning tower in number 1, where light gasoline came off the top and the heavy oil out the bottom. Building number 2 also contained 2 pumps. One pumped gasoline into underground tanks for cooling and short-term storage. The second pumped heavy oil to tanks not visible in the photo. Number 3 houses a pump which pumps gasoline to storage tanks 8 to 11. Number 5 is the office. Number 7 house salt core samples from exploratory drilling on the east side of Highway 114. A vehicle garage has been added on the highway side of Building 6, the boiler. I would think Ivor or Donald climbed the tank to take this photo. And this one. Visible in this photo is the Olofsson family home on the left background. This house is Civic number 37 on the Dawson Settlement Road today. Somebody drove their 1951 Pontiac to the refinery, climbed the crude oil tank, and took this photo of his car. The underground tanks used to cool the gasoline are visible in the foreground. The fractioning tower is uncovered. Myrtle Olofsson may have taken this picture of the Weldon storage tanks featuring Ivor's much-loved English Bulldog, Snubby. And this one. Discarded railcar tanks are visible in the foreground. The back side of the refinery is on the left. This is one of several photos taken in July 1947 and lodged at the Steeves House in Hillsborough. Local history, which often is not appreciated, is well represented in this museum and worthy of a visit. By now the company has 3 steel derricks. In 1947, New Brunswick Oilfields Limited became the new owners. This may have prompted some picture taken. Well 149 is abandoned. By 1947, the yard inventory is less impressive since steel derricks replaced wood. Bill Jonah and Harold Toole lived in the small house off the end of the warehouse for 2 or 3 years in the 1930s, after Bill's wife died. Rigger Arnold McFarlane and his family are living there in 1947. The longer building in the center was the lab, manned by civil engineer geologist Bill Monroe and Hank O'Shea. From 1947 to 1950, Shell drilled 5 exploration wells but found no commercial quantity of oil. O.H. Parker Oil Producers from Oklahoma was one of many experienced companies to search for oil. This article from the May 2, 1955 edition of the Moncton Transcript, quoting Mr. Parker as expecting their experience and knowledge would yield fabulous results. Records state Parker Oil drilled 6 wells at a cost of $750,000 with limited success. An oil field map shows one Parker well, P8, which is still producing. Another well drilled by Parker Oil. From 1957 until 1961, Imperial Oil drilled on the New Brunswick Oilfields lease, but not Stony Creek, without success. Ulrich Milton Jr. was the driller at this well. In the background is the village of Hillsborough, the railway, and the still operating gypsum plant. In 1962, Western DeKalta Petroleum Limited purchased controlling interest in New Brunswick Oilfields. They tried without success to increase oil production by water flood methods. They optioned other companies to drill, surrendering the license in 1974. Doug Steeves started with Western DeKalta in 1967. Doug Steeves worked for Western DeKalta from 1967 until 1975, receiving this service certificate in 1972. In 1980, a joint venture between Irving Oil and Chevron, along with other companies, drilled several wells inside and outside the Stony Creek field. Over a 5-year period beginning in 2006, the majority of wells drilled over the previous decades were abandoned by Irving. The abandonment procedure involved mechanical and concrete plugs and restoration of the surface. The next 4 pictures bring an end to the once promising bitumen business. This sign was on Route 114, the end of the Beach Hill Road. Rust ruled. The road to the hill was gated. This same gate is still in place today. Warehouse and Well 20 sit idle. The end of an era. The refinery is dissolving into iron oxide from which it came. This pump jack in Doug's Park was last used at Well 89. A shelter surrounds Well 89 today, which is still producing. The feed line to the insulated storage tank is itself insulated. The slave cylinder driving the pump receives hydraulic pressure from the electric motor-driven pump in the foreground. The oil fields have come to life again with the drilling of a new well by Contact Exploration Incorporated, a junior oil and gas exploration company from Calgary. A close-up of well A89 reveals an enclosed pipeline immersed in a heated glycol solution to keep oil flowing in all but extreme cold. The gray-colored lines connect the hydraulic pump to the cylinder mounted atop the 4 support posts. Natural gas exiting the well from the bottom fuels a heater. Oil from the top feed is pumped to oil tanks shown in the next frame. This RST tanker, with a capacity of 38,000 liters, is destined for the Irving Refinery in St. John. The small tanker truck on the right carries oil from remote wells. The oil tanks are insulated and heated by the same gas-fired glycol heater. The small flag on the large storage tank indicates wind direction, providing extra safety when handling fuel. This is the sole well remaining from Parker Drilling's efforts in 1955. The hydraulic pump at this site is driven by an electric motor. Newer methods enable some of these older wells to continue production to the present day. Well 18 is not supplied with electricity, so the hydraulic pump is driven by a V6 engine fueled with natural gas from the well. Lyle Milton, Contact's Stony Creek operations supervisor, provided insight into the workings of today's technology. Doug Steeves, a former oil field employee, toured Bryan Terrace, Vaughn Snyder, and Al Renton around the oil field, enabling many of these photos to be taken. The company pays an annual user fee since all wells are located on locally owned private property. The red line is gas production, the blue oil. This chart shows that natural gas production peaked in 1914, declining in fits and starts until production ceased in 1991. On September the 21st, 1917, gas well number 45 came online, resulting in a spike in production, much to the relief of the company and its customers. Oil extraction ended in 1987 at 803,809 barrels. Oil production peaked in 1946 at 30,000 barrels. Recent oil extraction numbers match the best results of the early years. Assuming Stony Creek crude earned $100 per barrel, then in excess of $10 million revenue has accrued from 2007 to 2012. A portion of this is royalty paid to the province. Output continues to drop from the peak of 2011, equaling about 50 barrels per day in 2013. These 11 wells were drilled on the Westmoreland County side of the river. None were productive. New Brunswick gas and oil field drilling in Albert County ceased in 1969 at well number 167. Alan Steeves and his wife built a house in Weldon that backed onto the former oil field. To their surprise, it also included an interesting conversation piece. Well, W109 casing, the in-ground tooling, storage pipe, and concrete support pads for the derrick were still in place. This well was Harry Hawks's baby, located near his house. When the well dried up, Harry was said to want to hire a rotary drill to reactivate it. Doug Steeves, in his preservation park, is keeping the memory of Weldon and its businesses alive: railway, oil and gas production, and shipbuilding. A special thanks to those who contributed pictures and stories to this three-part video. Everyone went the extra kilometer to dig photos out of albums, some of which haven't seen the light of day for many years. Large collections of photos and memorabilia were lost because nobody thought they were important. Reg Forbes, a retired Moncton electricity and gas employee, remembers a dumpster being filled when NB Power took over the Moncton utility in the 1960s.